I've had my Bambu Lab X2D since they sent it out at the time of release, so it's been several months, and I have 124 hours currently on the clock. So I wanted to do a 100-hour update, which I know in the world of 3D printing, 100 hours, it's kind of like saying I put 5 or 10,000 miles on a Toyota. Like, probably a lot more, hopefully a lot more life left in there than that. But I think 100 hours is enough time to weed out any potential issues or defects, or, it's enough to get past the honeymoon phase and into the what is it actually like to work with this printer phase. So I've got my notes with the good, the bad, and everything in between, and I just kind of wanted to share that with you if you're thinking of getting the X2D, if you did get the X2D, if you're trying to decide between this and something like the P2S or the P1S or the H2D. Let's talk all about the X2D. So the first thing I'll say is that I do think that the X2D is probably, at the time I'm recording this, Bambu's greatest value in terms of printer. Like, dollar per feature ratio, if that's a thing, is probably the highest with this printer. The combo with the AMS2 Pro is $899, which is definitely not like pocket change or anything, but for everything this printer can do, that is a really good deal. And I do think it is worth getting the AMS. I kind of say this when I talk about any of my printers, but if there's a combo with the AMS, this is absolutely worth it. The P2S, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is normally $799, so $100 less, although currently I am seeing it listed at $749. It doesn't say if it's a sale or anything, so I don't know if they have adjusted the price to be a $150 difference, which literally, as I'm recording this, kind of changes my opinion a little bit. But overall, if you want the most 3D printing features per dollar value, the X2D is excellent to deliver that. So I've been using mine to print all kinds of stuff, especially kind of longer term projects, a lot of organizational things. I recently did the honeycomb storage wall, which I made a video about, and that was a lot of printing. It seems simple, but it is a deceptively large amount of printing, and the majority of that was printed on the X2D, but it was also spread across my other printers, which is why also the hours aren't stacking up on this printer the way they were when I got my P2S, because now that I have the P2S, H2C, and X2D, they, many hands make light, many nozzles make light prints. I don't know. But that alone, the honeycomb storage wall was almost 100 hours of printing by itself. And, I would say, 35 or 40 of those hours were on this printer here. So definitely a lot of its use has been for that. I've done a lot of the Gridfinity stuff, but I've also been trying to use it for things that need specific support. So anytime I printed something, even like figurines and stuff, not just practical prints, but actually things just for fun, when they need any kinds of specific supports, that is really what I've been trying to take advantage of with the X2D, because it's one of the areas that it really shines. And as for filaments, I've mainly been printing PLA and PETG. Those are just my two favorites, and primarily PLA. I have done some ABS in here and even a little bit of TPU through the TPU for AMS, so not quite as like squishy as regular TPU is. They've all worked great, including ABS, which has had no problems. And in the HT, which I probably don't need, it does come with the side rack, and I've been using the HT, which Bambu sent over when they sent the H2C, but I've been using it here for the second nozzle just because it makes it a little bit less annoying to load, which we'll kind of talk about. But this is Bambu's support material, so it's not even regular filament, it's support for PLA. And to me, that's been a great use of the second nozzle. And what I can say about the X2D, which is hopefully what you can expect from, what you should expect from Bambu printers, is that I have not had any major issues. I've spent way more time printing than tinkering, a little bit of regular maintenance, which is super simple to do. I've not had like bed adhesion issues. I've not had any clogs or jams. I don't think I've had any, I don't even know if I've had any failed prints on this. Maybe one, which was like a bad design that's my fault. So it has been a very, very reliable printer and a very high quality printer. But getting into really the highlight feature of the X2D, why would you want this over something like the P2S? There are a few reasons, but the big one is, of course, that it is a dual nozzle printer, so that kind of opens up some options. But there is a bit of an asterisk there. It depends on your workflow. If you're primarily a PLA printer, then you might find yourself getting a little more versatility, I think, with the dual nozzle, because it can handle PLA just fine. It can handle some other things. I mean, according to the list that you see on Bambu's website, the second nozzle can handle most like non-super specific engineering filaments, but your results may vary. It is an older style Bowden extruder, and that's the big difference. If you look at something like the H2D or the H2C that have dual nozzles, they are both direct drive. So the main nozzle, or like on the P2S, the X2D, it's basically like two of those, and those are very, very fast and very, very high quality. The Bowden extruder on the X2D's second nozzle is pretty old school, but that's how they were able to make this printer not cost more than $1,000. And it's still pretty capable, but it is slower. That is kind of a problem with Bowden extruders. I think I have the numbers here. What is it? The main nozzle can move at 1,000 millimeters a second, and the Bowden extruder is 200 millimeters a second. So that's a fifth the speed, which might not matter if you're not looking to print as fast as possible, but it is something to keep in mind if you're printing with, like, you know, you have PLA running into both nozzles. You're not going to get the full speed out of the main nozzle. You're going to kind of be working with the lower speed because of the Bowden extruder. And then Bowdens can be prone to a little more stringing and stuff just because of the way they work, and honestly, they're just not as good as the direct drives of the main nozzle, which is why they're not as common anymore, and why Bambu themselves even list the second nozzle as an auxiliary nozzle and not just a full-on second nozzle. PLA, I've had pretty good results doing, you know, just dual PLA printing, which will save you a lot of waste, because instead of having to change every time, if you're just doing those two colors, you can just go back and forth between the two nozzles, and that works great. My favorite use, which I think is really the intended use of the second nozzle, is for supports and support materials. And I did a whole video on support materials and everything I've kind of learned about them and how to use them, and I've even refined that since, specifically with this support material. So when you're making a print that needs supports, one thing you can do in Bambu Studio is decide which layers the support material is going to be used on, which could be whatever you want. It doesn't have to be this specific support material, which I've just actually really liked, so I've been using it a lot. But you can use, you know, like PLA and PETG, for example, don't stick together very well. So if you try to do a print that involves both of them, you're gonna have a bad time. But if you're using, you know, PETG as support for PLA, then it's actually kind of nice because they break apart, or it peels apart and separates so easily. The problem with something like that, though, is that PETG does kind of like some different temperatures than PLA, and you're going back and forth as you're doing the supports. So what you can do is just change the support material on the interface layer, which is, as you're building up your support, the support can be the same material as the main print, and then just the layer, or a couple of layers really, that interact with the main print, that's what's going to be that support material. So in my case, that's this right here, but if that's PETG or something like that, and then that can help you have very easily separatable supports. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, and this workflow works really, really well for that. So if you do a lot of prints that require supports and you find yourself either, you know, kind of spending a lot of time as materials are switching back and forth on a single nozzle printer, or you're just doing everything in one material and your supports aren't separating very cleanly and you have to spend a lot of time kind of fixing up and polishing up your prints, the X2D could actually be a huge help with that workflow. So before jumping straight to the X2D, I do think it's important to think about what kind of prints you plan to do, what your workflow is like, what materials you use, and then you'll kind of know if it's a good fit for you or if the second nozzle is going to be something that just doesn't really end up getting used. And as this printer has become really popular since its release, that is something I've talked to a lot of people about. There's been a lot of people who just through messages and comments and things, they got the X2D because you spent, you know, $100 more than the P2S and you get what seems to be a lot more features and you get the dual nozzle. And you'd be kind of surprised at the number of people who have said they've never used the second nozzle, but they, you know, they wanted to have it. They like that security. And kind of going back to my Toyota analogy, in my review for the X2D, I kind of did compare it to a car. Like, I have a Toyota RAV4. I know, don't be too impressed. It's a 10-year-old RAV4, and when I got it, there was the option to get a 4-wheel drive model, and part of me was like, it's a couple $1,000s more, you know, then I had all these visions of what I was gonna do with my, you know, 4-wheel off-road adventures. And I didn't get it because I had never needed 4-wheel drive up to that point, and in the 10.5 years I've had my car since, I've never needed it a single time. So it would have been an additional cost, and it would have been an additional system to maintain and additional parts to potentially fail or replace. and I haven't regretted my decision of not getting the 4-wheel drive version a single time. Similarly over here, I think a lot of people, like, it feels really good to spend a little bit more money and get the second nozzle, but if you don't use it, you know, I don't know that it really hurts anything, but it is more stuff to be aware of, to maintain, to potentially have issues. So that's kind of why for beginners, I have been leaning a little bit more towards recommending the P2S, because it's just such a simple, reliable printer to get up and running. But it's also, I do understand, even if you're new to 3D printing and you might not know what your workflow is going to be, you might not know what kind of printing you're going to do, and so you think, well, I'll get the X2D and then at least I have the option, instead of, you know, you buy the P2S and then you realize you print a lot of stuff with supports, or you print a lot of dual color things where it'd be really nice to have that second nozzle, and now you don't have it, and maybe you do feel a little bit limited. Sometimes it's impossible to know whether or not that will happen without just experiencing it and seeing what happens. So I fully do understand why people jump into the X2D, even if they end up not using the second nozzle. And at $100 difference in price, you know, $800 versus $900, it's not a huge price difference. With the P2S currently being $150, I think that makes it maybe a little more like, sit and really think about your workflow. If the P2S were $200 cheaper than the X2D, then I think that would really differentiate them a lot, and it'd be very, very clear, like, get the P2S unless you know for sure you need the other features of the X2D, because it is not just the dual nozzles. Of course, you do have the heated chamber, and you have different filtration in here as well, so that's important to remember. And for a lot of people, that ends up being worth it more than the second nozzle, especially if you're printing with stuff beyond PLA and PETG, using ABS, using engineering filaments and those kinds of things. Having the actively heated chamber can really make a difference. And I will say, for what it is worth, I have had a few bed adhesion issues with my P2S since I've gotten it, and usually if I clean the build plate, it's okay. So far, knock on wood, I have never had a bed adhesion issue with the X2D, and part of me can't help but wonder if that's because of the actively heated chamber, just kind of keeping the temperature a little more consistent and helping the prints to stick, even when I am using just kind of those basic filaments. Another thing that's been really, really helpful, same with my P2S, is if you go into the Bambu Handy app, there are free, totally free online courses for their printers, and I definitely recommend whatever Bambu printer you have, logging in and doing that, because there's a ton of info there. It's not just marketing of like, this is why the printer is the best, but it actually teaches you the fundamentals of 3D printing, the fundamentals of the systems and the types of, you know, features in your specific 3D printer. And it really, I think, just helps you learn a little bit more, be a little bit more knowledgeable, and be prepared to handle any potential issues that arise. Although with all three of my printers, I guess I probably had the fewest issues with this one now that I think about it. But anytime I've needed anything, it does just pop up a QR code on the display, and then that usually takes me to a wiki help article that explains exactly what to do if this doesn't just literally tell you what to do. And speaking of Bambu Handy, I have been using this with Bambu software, of course, because that's, you know, to me, that's the reason I bought a Bambu printer, was I wanted the simple ecosystem of just, you click the button and it works and it does the thing. So I use it on my phone, which now I've used it on iPhone and an Android phone. I've used it on Mac and PC, and honestly, the user experience is exactly the same on all the different apps across all the different devices. So I think that's really cool, and it's really nice to be able to like start a print on my iPhone and check it on my PC and adjust something on my Mac. Like, that's really, really, literally, it's in the name of the app. It's handy. And as I mentioned, spending more time printing than tinkering, I haven't really done any modifications. The X2D does have the same issue as the P2S with the PTFE tube rubbing on the top glass here. And actually, are both tubes running? Yeah, it actually has two. It's twice as bad on this one. Basically, this top glass is just a little too low, and the way these are set up, the tubes just rub across the glass. And so even today before filming, because I wanted to make sure this was nice and clean, I took that and really kind of scrubbed off some tube residue that had accumulated. But I don't really think it causes any issues. You can print risers, which is something I was really determined to do when I got my P2S, but I never did. And on that printer now I have like 400 hours on it and it's completely fine. And same with this one, it's completely fine. I guess over time it could wear down the tubes and then you'd maybe have to replace them more quickly, but I think that's gonna be quite a long time. I don't know, it's not really an issue unless it's something that just drives you crazy and then you can print a riser or adjust something like that. The only thing I've done, which you have to do with every Bambu printer, is, figure out your poop chute situation. And I found this design, which I'll link in the description. This is not my original design. I like this one for this printer because it has a little hanger that you print. So that way it's not just hanging on a screw, but it actually kind of like, it's a little more sturdy on a hanger. And it's specifically designed to go around the different back plate of the X2D. I use different poop chutes on my other printers because they just sort of have different arrangements and different spacing on the back of the printer. But this one, there's a huge fan and filter right here that kind of makes a lot of poop chutes for the other printers not compatible with this. And this one has been the simplest one that I found. I've never used one of the complicated poop chutes, which look really fun, like it's like a water slide for your poops. But they just seem kind of like they could cause a lot of issues or cause a lot of clogs. I just use these simple basket ones and they work really, really well. And honestly, this thing does not produce a lot of waste for the type of printing I do. So I only empty this, every so often. So when all is said and done, I really do think that the X2D is a great printer, but I think it's very, very important to either buy this printer or consider it based on realistic expectations of your use case and your workflow and what the printer is intended to do. The second nozzle specifically is kind of the biggest point of confusion because Bambu themselves, like I said, list it as an auxiliary nozzle. So it's not intended to be equal with the main nozzle. But of course, there are people out there who do like to tinker and mod and stress test things and have put it through its paces and been like, no, you can use that for all kinds of cool stuff. And maybe you can, maybe you can't. I like to look at things from the point of view of a casual printer or a home hobbyist printer, somebody new to 3D printing. What is their experience going to be like? And your experience with the X2D is going to be more complicated than it is with the P2S because you do have the second nozzle and it is a Bowden extruder. So loading it, especially if you're using just the manual external rack right here, loading that is just it's not bad. It's the way every 3D printer worked, up until 5 or 10 years ago. So it's not that bad. As soon as I got a Bambu printer with an AMS and I was like, wow, it just reads the filament and loads it for me and I don't have to do anything or heat anything or purge anything, whatever, it just does everything for me. I never wanted to go back to a Bowden extruder. So that's also why the HT over here has been a huge help because it kind of brings a little more of that functionality to the second nozzle here and makes it a little less annoying to load. But that might just be my past frustrations with older 3D printers carrying over into this one. I do think it's very valid to want to get this printer for the other features it has, like the heated chamber. And there are a few things, even compared to the X2D, they're just, even the way the lights are arranged, the filtration, some of the little components in here have been modified and updated. So there's a little bit of quality improvements. And the fact that I'm looking through here, there's windows on each side. That's kind of a helpful thing when it comes to, it's nice for me as someone who makes videos about 3D printing because you can like film through there, but also just monitoring your prints and checking on things. It is very, very helpful. The reason that this printer is not in my office full-time, I have this in an H2C in a different room, in a different setup, and I have the P2S in here full-time is actually because of these windows. As much as I love them, where I keep my printer and when I'm sitting at my desk, the height is just exactly right that the super bright LED lights in here shine directly into my eyes the entire time I'm sitting there, and it's really, really annoying. And if you turn off the lights, it can affect the camera and the camera's ability to not just like film time lapses and stuff, but to detect issues with stringing or bed adhesion or whatever. And so it's good when you're printing to keep the lights on, so that way the camera can detect those issues more easily. But that's why the P2S lives in here, which has solid sides, so that way it can be in here, it can be on, and I don't have to be blinded the whole time because that is definitely not fun. And I think most people are probably trying to decide between the P2S and the X2D, which I do have an entire separate video about. Again, I think it's just really important to be specific about what your realistic expectations are for your workflow. And whenever you do decide a printer and you want to get it set up, figuring out where to put your printer and what kind of thing to put it on, like what kind of stands or supports, is also surprisingly tricky, so I do have a separate dedicated video all about that as well.